The Galactic Vorta Empire was about to crush the last of the human race when Earth's top-secret supercarrier arrived to turn the tide. Captain Brian Tucker gripped the armrests of his command chair as another explosion rocked the bridge of the UES Retribution. Sparks showered from overloaded consoles. The ship's aging hull groaned under the onslaught of the Vorta fleet's superior weaponry. "Shields down to 15%, shouted the tactical officer. "Reroute all auxiliary power to forward shields," Brian ordered, "and keep firing. We have to buy time for the escape pods." The Vorta barrage intensified. The Retribution's shields failed. A searing energy beam sliced through decks, venting atmosphere and crew into the void of space. Brian was thrown from his chair, his head slamming into a bulkhead. As he lost consciousness, he saw escape pods jettisoning from the crippled ship. The Vorta moved in for the kill, confident of their victory over the last of the human resistance. But they didn't know Earth still had one card left to play. A secret weapon that could turn the tide and shock the Galactic Empire to its core. Brian's eyes cracked open. He was in a cold, sterile cell, the only furniture a hard metal slab that served as a bed. Every bone in his body ached. The cell door hissed open, and Admiral Knox strode in, flanked by 2 guards. The Vorta commander's face twisted into a triumphant sneer. "Captain Tucker, so good of you to join us." Knox's voice dripped with disdain. Brian struggled to sit up, his muscles screaming in protest. "What do you want, Knox?" "What I want is the location of your remaining bases. Your pathetic resistance is finished. Make this easy on yourself and tell me where they are." Brian spat blood on the floor. "Go to hell." Knox chuckled darkly. "Oh, Captain, we've been watching you humans for centuries. Did you know that? Waiting for the right time to take what is rightfully ours. Your kind's resilience, your adaptability, it makes you dangerous. A threat to our empire that must be stamped out." The Admiral's fist slammed into Brian's gut, doubling him over. The beating continued, Knox's demands for information punctuated by blows. But Brian gritted his teeth, refusing to betray his people. He would die before he broke. Light years away, on the bridge of the UES Valkyrie, Commander Alara Singh stared at the decoded message on her screen, hardly daring to believe what she was reading. The message was from a Vorta named Zorn, claiming to be a defector. It spoke of a hidden Vorta superweapon, a ship that could annihilate entire star systems, but it also provided coordinates to the shipyard where this monstrosity was being built, along with security codes to help them slip past the defenses. It was almost too good to be true. But what choice did they have? The Vorta had them on the brink of extinction. "Set course for the coordinates in this message," Alara ordered, "and ready all combat teams. One way or another, we end this today." The human fleet dropped out of warp at the edge of the shipyard, and Alara felt her blood run cold. They had expected a large Vorta presence, but this was a massacre waiting to happen. Thousands upon thousands of Vorta destroyers, cruisers, and battleships stretched as far as the eye could see, and there, at the center of it all, was the superweapon. It was gargantuan, easily 5 times the size of the largest Vorta battleship. The Valkyrie would be like a gnat in comparison. Alara swallowed hard. They were outgunned and hopelessly outnumbered. But they had to try, for Brian, for Earth, for the survival of the human race. "All ships engage the enemy. Fighters, clear a path to that superweapon. We're going in." Alara turned to her strike team, a grim set to her jaw. "Gear up. We're going to infiltrate that thing and blow it straight to hell, and God help any Vorta that gets in our way." The human fleet surged forward, mass drivers and laser cannons opening up on the Vorta lines. The battle for humanity's future had begun. Commander Alara Singh fired her plasma rifle, dropping 2 Vorta soldiers as her strike team breached the superweapon's hull. They'd blown their way in through an access hatch, but the Vorta were quick to respond. Singh's team pushed forward, taking cover behind bulkheads as energy beams sizzled past. "Zorn, we're in. Guide us to the control room," Singh barked into her comm. The Vorta defector's voice crackled in her ear, directing them through the labyrinthine corridors of the massive vessel. Singh's team moved swiftly, but the Vorta resistance was fierce. Singh watched as several of her soldiers fell, cut down by the relentless enemy fire. They battled their way to the central control room, the casualty count mounting with every clash. Singh gritted her teeth as another of her men screamed, his armor melting under a barrage of plasma. But there was no time to mourn. They had to push on. Finally, they reached the control room, only to find it empty. Singh frowned. Where was the command crew? Face you. Why would I bother? This entire vessel is a trap designed to lure in the last dregs of your pathetic resistance. And now, with your fleet being torn apart outside, Earth will be left defenseless against the might of the Vorta Armada. Singh's blood ran cold. The fleet... Light years away in a dank Vorta holding cell, Captain Brian Tucker screamed. A neural device was clamped to his head, forcing him to relive his darkest memories. He was back on Earth, watching helplessly as Vorta ships rained destruction on his homeworld. He saw his family running for shelter. He reached out to them, but his hand passed through them like smoke. This wasn't real. It was just a memory. But then something caught his eye. A flicker of movement in the background, something that didn't fit. Brian focused on it, pushing through the pain and grief that threatened to overwhelm him. The anomalies sharpened, resolved into data, streams of Vorta data flowing through the neural link. With a surge of willpower, Brian seized control of the data stream. He plunged into the Vorta network, his mind racing through terabytes of information. There had to be something here, some weakness to exploit, some way to fight back. And then he found it, a file buried deep in the Vorta archives. Brian opened it and felt his world shatter. The Vorta hadn't invaded Earth on a whim. It was a preemptive strike, aimed at neutralizing a threat that the Vorta had detected, a threat from Earth's own past. Brian read on, hardly able to process the implications of what he was seeing. Brian's mind reeled as he processed the revelation from the Vorta databanks. Project Titan, a secret human endeavor to create a warship powerful enough to defeat entire alien armadas. And the Vorta had known, had attacked Earth to eliminate this threat before it could challenge their dominion. With a roar of determination, Brian surged to his feet. He charged the cell door as it slid open, slamming into the Vorta guard entering. Bones crunched. The guard crumpled. Brian snatched the fallen guard's plasma rifle and burst into the corridor, firing at every Vorta he saw. Alarms blared. Reinforcements poured in. But Brian was a man possessed. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered beast, driven by desperation and the weight of the knowledge he carried. Plasma bolts sizzled past him, scorching the walls. Brian returned fire, his shots precise, lethal. He reached the command center, leaving a trail of Vorta corpses in his wake. "Captain, you're alive!" Singh's voice was strained, the sounds of battle raging in the background. "Listen carefully," Brian said. "The Vorta invaded because of a secret human project, a warship called Titan. It may be our only hope. I'm going to find it." "Understood. We'll buy you time." On the Vorta superweapon, Singh and her team fought like demons. They sabotaged every system they could, overloading the energy cores, disabling the shields. The Vorta came at them in waves, but they held their ground, knowing that every second counted. Finally, the ship shuddered, explosions blossoming across its hull. The superweapon tore itself apart, the blasts consuming the Vorta ships nearby. Singh and a few survivors raced to a hangar, commandeering a shuttle. They blasted free of the dying ship as it erupted in a supernova of destruction. But there was no time to celebrate. Across the galaxy, Admiral Knox snarled in rage at the loss of his prize weapon. "Invade Earth," he commanded. "Raze it to ashes." 1,000 Vorta ships descended on Earth like a plague of locusts. Cities burned. Millions died in the first minutes. Earth's defenders fought bravely, but were hopelessly outmatched. Brian raced against time, following a cryptic trail left by Project Titan's scientists through abandoned bases and secret databanks. The clues led him to Antarctica, to a vast complex buried beneath miles of ice. He blasted his way inside, and there it was, the UES Titan, a mountain of a ship bristling with weapons unlike anything he'd seen. Its hull shimmered with an energy field that promised invulnerability. Brian strode onto the bridge, the ship's systems awakening at his presence. He was the last hope, the final guardian. The UES Titan rose from its frozen tomb, ready to bring the war to the Vorta. The UES Titan hummed with newfound life as Brian and the Project Titan survivors raced to bring its systems online. Consoles flickered, engines thrummed, and the very deck plates seemed to vibrate with anticipation. The sudden arrival of Commander Singh and her team added to the frenetic energy. As the strike team disembarked from their cloaked shuttle, Singh strode up to Brian, her face a mix of relief and urgency. "Captain, it's good to see you," she said, clasping his hand, "but we don't have much time." She quickly relayed their discovery during the sabotage of the Vorta superweapon, a critical vulnerability in the aliens' shielding technology. A specific energy frequency, when broadcast, could penetrate and disrupt their shields. Together they formulated a daring plan. The UES Titan, with its advanced weaponry and formidable defenses, would serve as a decoy, engaging the Vorta armada head-on. Meanwhile, Singh would lead a smaller team aboard a cloaked shuttle to infiltrate the Vorta command ship. Their mission: upload a virus to broadcast the shield-disrupting frequency across the entire Vorta fleet. As the Titan rose from its icy hangar, breaching the atmosphere in a blaze of thrusters, the Vorta were quick to take notice. Alarms blared across their fleet as the mammoth human ship appeared on their sensors. On the bridge of his command ship, Admiral Knox sneered at the viewscreen. "So the humans want a fight? Let's give them one they won't forget." He barked orders, directing his armada to converge on the Titan's position. Hundreds of Vorta ships swarmed like angry hornets, their weapons primed. The Titan met them head-on, its advanced energy weapons slicing through the void. Vorta ships exploded under the onslaught, but more surged forward to take their place. The Titan's shields flared under the barrage, but held firm. As the battle raged, Singh's team maneuvered their cloaked shuttle through the chaos, slipping undetected into the hangar of Knox's command ship. They emerged with weapons drawn, cutting down surprised Vorta troops as they pushed towards the ship's computer core. But as they uploaded the virus, alarms screeched. Knox's face appeared on a viewscreen, contorted with rage. "Fools! You think you can sabotage my ship and live?" Across the battlefield, Vorta shields flickered and died as the virus took hold. The Titan and the remnants of Earth's fleet seized the moment, pouring fire into the defenseless ships. Vorta cruisers crumpled under the assault, escape pods jettisoning like panicked fireflies. On the Titan's bridge, Brian watched the tide turn with grim satisfaction. They were winning. Against all odds, they were beating back the Vorta invasion. But even as the last Vorta ships fled or burned, Brian knew this was just the beginning. Earth lay in ruins, its people scattered and traumatized. And out there in the stars, the rest of the Vorta Empire waited, no doubt already plotting their revenge. The fight was far from over, but with the Titan at their command and the will to never surrender, humanity would rise from the ashes, they would rebuild, and they would bring the fight to the Vorta, wherever they hid. For now, though, there was still work to be done. The Titan's crew scrambled to assess damage, tend to the wounded, and secure their sudden, precarious victory. Brian turned back to the viewscreen, watching Earth grow larger as they descended towards the scorched, battered world that was their home. As the last of the Vorta ships burned in Earth's orbit, a ragged cheer went up from the survivors on the planet's surface. In the ruins of shattered cities, humans emerged from their hiding places, blinking in the sunlight like newborn creatures. They gazed up at the skies, hardly daring to believe that the nightmare was over. On the bridge of the UES Titan, Brian slumped in his command chair, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Commander Singh stood at his side, her uniform torn and bloodied, but her eyes shining with the light of victory. As if in answer to his words, a sudden hail came over the comm system. Brian frowned as he saw the source. It was coming from Zorn, the Vorta defector who had helped them infiltrate the superweapon. He exchanged a glance with Singh, then opened the channel. "Zorn, I thought you'd be halfway across the galaxy by now." The Vorta's face appeared on the view screen, his features drawn and haggard. "Captain Tucker, Commander Singh, I wish I brought better news." Brian felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" "The Vorta, they were not the true threat. They were merely servants, pawns in a much larger game." Zorn's voice was urgent, almost panicked. "The real enemy, the ones who pulled the strings, they are called the Kalthar." Singh leaned forward. "The Kalthar, I've never heard of them." "Few have. They are an ancient race, immensely powerful. Their psionic abilities allow them to control the minds of lesser species, to manipulate reality itself." Zorn shuddered. The Vorta invasion, the destruction of Earth, it was all part of their plan. Brian's hands clenched into fists. "Why, what do they want?" "I don't know, but I do know they will not take the defeat of their servants lightly. They will come for you, for Earth. You must be ready." No sooner had the words left Zorn's mouth than alarms blared across the Titan's bridge. Singh rushed to a console, her eyes widening. "Spatial anomaly detected in Earth orbit. Something's coming through." The view screen shifted, showing a massive rift tearing open the fabric of space. From its swirling depths emerged ships unlike any Brian had ever seen, gargantuan, otherworldly vessels that dwarfed even the Titan. As if in response to their name, the alien ships opened fire. But it was no ordinary attack. Waves of psionic energy swept over the Earth, and suddenly the comm channels were filled with screams. On the planet's surface, people fell to their knees, clutching their heads, their minds assaulted by visions of terror and despair. Brian staggered as the psychic assault washed over him, but he gritted his teeth and pushed through. "All ships engage the enemy. Protect Earth at all costs." The Titan surged forward, its advanced shields absorbing the brunt of the psionic onslaught. Its weapon systems locked on, sending lances of energy slicing into the Kalthar ships. But for every vessel they damaged, two more seemed to take its place. The Kalthar fleet was vast, a veritable armada from the depths of nightmare. As the battle raged around them, Brian felt something brush against his mind. A presence ancient and vast, probing at the edges of his consciousness. He gasped as images flooded his mind, visions of a world long dead, of a civilization that had once spanned the stars. And at the heart of it all, an artifact, an object of immense power capable of reshaping the very fabric of the universe. The Kalthar were searching for it, he realized. They believed it was here, on Earth. Brian's eyes snapped open. He knew with a certainty that defied explanation that finding this artifact was the key. It was the only way to defeat the Kalthar, to end their reign of terror once and for all. But as the Titan shook under another barrage of psionic energy, Brian knew that time was running out. The battle for Earth, for the very fate of the galaxy, had only just begun. Brian's mind reeled, images of the Nexus flashing through his thoughts, guiding him like a beacon. The ancient alien temple, hidden deep within the Amazon rainforest, called to him. He knew, with a certainty that defied explanation, that the artifact the Kalthar sought lay within its walls. He gathered a strike team, the best of the best from the UES Titan's crew. They geared up, checking weapons and adjusting armor, their faces set with determination. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. The dropship hurtled through the atmosphere, the dense canopy of the rainforest rushing up to meet them. They landed in a small clearing, the humidity immediately clinging to their skin as they disembarked. Brian led the way, his weapon at the ready, the strike team fanning out behind him. They pushed through the undergrowth, vines and branches clawing at their armor. The jungle seemed to close in around them, as if trying to impede their progress. And then they saw it. The temple rose from the foliage, ancient stone blocks covered in alien glyphs. It emanated an aura of power, of something otherworldly. They approached cautiously, scanning for any signs of Kalthar presence. But the temple appeared undisturbed, silent except for the distant calls of exotic birds. The entrance yawned before them, a dark maw leading into the unknown. Brian signaled his team forward. They activated their helmet lights, the beams piercing the gloom. Step by step, they descended into the temple's depths. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, depicting a race of beings unlike any Brian had ever seen. They seemed to tell a story, but its meaning eluded him. Suddenly a low hum filled the air. Ancient machinery stirred to life, hidden gears grinding into motion. The floor beneath their feet began to shift and change, stone blocks rearranging themselves into a new configuration. "Move!" Brian shouted as a section of the floor fell away, revealing a pit lined with gleaming metal spikes. They leapt forward, barely avoiding the trap, but more were activating, the temple's defenses coming alive around them. Walls slid aside, revealing alcoves from which robotic sentinels emerged, their metal bodies glistening in the light of the team's helmet lamps. Energy beams lanced out, scorching the stone. The strike team scattered, taking cover behind crumbling pillars. They returned fire, the sound of gunshots and the sizzle of energy weapons filling the ancient halls. Brian ducked as a sentinel's beam seared the air above his head. He rolled, came up firing. His shots tore into the robot's chassis, sparks flying. It stumbled, then collapsed, its internal systems fried. They pushed forward, fighting for every inch. Sentinels fell, reduced to heaps of twisted metal. But more always seemed to take their place, an unending tide of mechanical guardians. At last they reached the temple's heart, and there on a raised dais was the Nexus. It pulsed with an inner light, a crystal of pure psionic energy. Brian could feel its power, even from a distance. It called to him, whispering in his mind. He stepped forward, hand outstretched. His fingers closed around the Nexus and the world fell away. Energy surged through him, a rush of raw power unlike anything he had ever known. Images flashed through his mind, snippets of the past and glimpses of possible futures. He saw the conduits, a vast network of gateways spanning the stars. He saw the Kalthar, their ships spreading like a plague across the galaxy, enslaving world after world. And he saw a way to stop them, a plan forming in his mind like a puzzle pieces, clicking into place. They retraced their steps, fighting through the remaining sentinels. The temple seemed to sense the Nexus's absence, the traps redoubling their efforts to stop the intruders. As they lifted off, heading back towards the UES Titan's position, Brian allowed himself a moment of relief. They had the Nexus. Now they had a chance to turn the tide, to take the fight to the Kalthar. But the moment was short-lived. Alarms blared in the dropship's cockpit. Sensors had detected incoming ships, Kalthar signatures, an ambush. The dropship shuddered as energy beams slammed into its shields. It returned fire, its own weapons tracing glowing lines across the sky. But the Kalthar ships were fast and maneuverable, darting in and out of range. Brian strapped himself into a jump seat, the Nexus container secured beside him. He could feel its energy, even through the shielded casing. It seemed to resonate with his own newly awakened psionic abilities, a harmonic that thrummed in his bones. The dropship shook again, sparks flying from overloaded consoles. They were losing shields, the Kalthar's weapons taking their toll. They needed to land, to find cover. The pilot brought them down in a small glade, the trees providing some measure of protection. The strike team disembarked, taking up defensive positions. They knew the Kalthar would be coming for the Nexus. They had to be ready. They came from the trees, Kalthar soldiers in sleek dark armor. At their head was a figure that radiated power, a psionic aura that made the air crackle with energy. Vaktur, a Kalthar warrior of legend. The battle was joined, energy beams and bullets flying. Brian's team fought with everything they had, but the Kalthar were relentless. They pushed forward, heedless of their losses, driven by a single-minded desire to claim the Nexus. In the midst of the chaos, Brian found himself face to face with Vaktur. The Kalthar warrior's eyes glowed with psionic power, boring into Brian's mind. He felt the pressure of Vaktur's will, trying to crush his own. But Brian pushed back, his own psionic abilities rising to meet the challenge. Their minds clashed, a silent battle raging even as their bodies traded blows. Vaktur's blade flashed, a slice of silver that Brian barely managed to dodge. He countered with a strike of his own, his fist glowing with psionic energy. Back and forth they fought, evenly matched. Around them the battle raged, the strike team fighting desperately to protect the Nexus. But they were being pushed back, the Kalthar's numbers telling. Just as it seemed that Vaktur would overwhelm him, Brian heard the roar of engines. Reinforcements had arrived, dropships bearing the markings of the UES Titan. Singh had come. The tide turned, the fresh troops evening the odds. Vaktur snarled, realizing that his chance to claim the Nexus was slipping away. With a final, desperate lunge, he managed to snatch a small fragment of the crystal before vanishing into the trees, his forces covering his retreat. Brian slumped, exhausted. They had held the Nexus, but only just. Singh was at his side in an instant, helping him to his feet. "We need to get this back to the Titan," Brian said, his voice ragged. "I think I know how we can use it to stop the Kalthar." On the Titan, they studied the Nexus, unlocking its secrets. It was more than just a source of power. It was a key, a way to access the conduits. With it, they could lure the Kalthar into a trap, to strike a decisive blow against the alien threat. Brian and Singh worked feverishly, devising a plan. They would broadcast a signal, making it appear as if they were attempting to activate the conduits. It would draw the Kalthar fleet like moths to a flame. And when they came, the UES Titan would be waiting. Earth's forces would emerge from hiding, engaging the enemy in a battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. It was a gamble, but it was their best chance. Brian looked out at the stars, the Nexus humming softly in his hand. Somewhere out there, the Kalthar were waiting. But this time, humanity would bring the fight to them. The signal went out, a pulse of energy that rippled across the stars. On the bridge of the UES Titan, Brian watched the sensors, waiting for the Kalthar's response. He didn't have to wait long. Warp signatures began to appear, dozens of them, then hundreds. The Kalthar fleet was on the move, converging on the Titan's position. Brian felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Singh, her face set with determination. "They're coming," she said. "It's time." He nodded, taking a deep breath. This was it, the moment of truth. He signaled to the fleet, the ships that had been hiding, waiting for this moment. They emerged from their concealed positions, a wall of steel and fire, ready to face the Kalthar head-on. The alien ships dropped out of warp, a sea of dark metal filling the viewscreen. For a moment there was silence, a held breath before the storm. Then all hell broke loose. Weapons fire crisscrossed the void, energy beams and missiles streaking between the opposing fleets. The UES Titan was at the heart of it, its advanced shields and weapons allowing it to stand toe-to-toe with the Kalthar's mightiest ships. But even with the element of surprise, even with the Titan's technological edge, the battle was far from certain. The Kalthar fought with a ferocity born of desperation, as if they knew that this battle would decide the war. Brian felt the Nexus's power surging within him, a well of psionic energy that seemed to have no bottom. He reached out with his mind, feeling for the enemy ships, for the Kalthar warriors who commanded them. There on the flagship he sensed a familiar presence, Vaktur, the psionic blade that had nearly bested him before. Brian focused, pouring his will into a single concentrated burst of psionic energy. On the Kalthar flagship, Vaktur staggered, clutching his head. His mental defenses crumbled, overwhelmed by Brian's assault. For a moment, his ship faltered, its weapons falling silent. It was the opening they needed. The UES Titan surged forward, its main cannon glowing with an intense, blinding light. It fired, a lance of pure energy that pierced the Kalthar flagship from stem to stern. Brian sagged back in his chair, drained. Through the Nexus he had felt Vaktur's final moments, the Kalthar warrior's psionic scream of defiance and despair. But it was over. Against all odds they had won. The Kalthar fleet was in ruins, its survivors fleeing into the depths of space. There would be more battles, Brian knew. The Kalthar Empire was vast, and its rulers would not take this defeat lightly. But for now, Earth was safe. Humanity had a chance to rebuild, to prepare for the challenges ahead. Brian looked around the bridge of the UES Titan, at the faces of his crew. They were battered, exhausted, but alive. They had fought and bled and sacrificed, and because of that, humanity would live to see another dawn. He clutched the Nexus, feeling its power thrumming in his hand. With this, they could unlock the secrets of the conduits, to explore the stars as they never had before. A new age was beginning, an age of discovery and expansion. And the UES Titan would be at the forefront, carrying the hopes and dreams of a species that had looked into the abyss and refused to blink. The battle was over, but the adventure was just beginning. With a burst of psionic energy, the Kalthar ships surged forward, their weapons glowing with malevolent power. Lances of searing light shot from their hulls, tearing through Earth's defensive lines. Fighters spun and exploded, frigates crumpled like tin cans. The very fabric of space warped and twisted under the onslaught of the Kalthar's psionic might. On the bridge of the UES Titan, Brian gritted his teeth as another barrage slammed into the ship's shields. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles, the deck shuddering beneath his feet. He could feel the Nexus pulsing in his mind, a conduit of raw power that he struggled to control. "Divert all power to forward shields," he barked. "And keep firing, damn it, we have to hold the line." The Titan's weapons blazed, lancing out to meet the Kalthar assault. Brian felt each shot as if it were an extension of his own will, guided by the Nexus's power. Kalthar ships exploded, their hulls shattering under the Titan's onslaught. But for every ship destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. The Kalthar pressed their attack, heedless of their losses, driven by a fanatical desire to reclaim the Nexus. Suddenly, a massive Kalthar dreadnought broke through Earth's lines, its prow aimed directly at the Titan. Brian sensed a familiar presence aboard the ship, a dark and twisted aura that he had felt before. The Kalthar champion had returned, his psionic powers swelled to monstrous proportions by the Nexus fragment he had stolen. Brian could feel Vaktur's malevolent will reaching out, seeking to crush his mind like an insect. But Brian pushed back, drawing on the full might of the Nexus. Psionic energy crackled around him, his eyes blazing with eldritch light. He launched a mental assault at Vaktur, their two wills clashing like titans in the void. The dreadnought shuddered, its course faltering as Vaktur struggled to maintain control. Around them the battle raged on, Earthships and Kalthar dreadnoughts locked in a deadly embrace. On the Titan's bridge, Singh watched the tactical displays with growing dread. The Kalthar ships were regenerating, their damaged hulls knitting back together before her eyes. She realized with a sudden, horrifying clarity that they were drawing power from the Nexus fragment in Vaktur's possession. She turned to the Marines at her side, the hardened veterans of 100 battles. "Gear up," she said. "We're going in." As the battle raged around them, Singh and her team boarded an assault shuttle, rocketing out of the Titan's hangar bay. They dodged and weaved through the chaos of the battle, plasma bolts and energy beams flashing past their viewports. Vaktur's dreadnought loomed before them, a mountain of dark metal bristling with weapons. Singh gripped her plasma rifle tightly as the shuttle punched through the ship's shields, skidding to a halt in its cavernous hangar bay. The Marines poured out, weapons blazing. Kalthar warriors swarmed to meet them, their psionic blades flashing. Singh fought like a woman possessed, her rifle spitting death with every shot. She could feel the Nexus calling to her, a siren song of power that drew her ever deeper into the ship. They fought their way through the corridors, leaving a trail of Kalthar corpses in their wake. The ship shook around them, the distant thunder of the battle raging outside. Finally, they reached the psionic core, a vast chamber pulsing with eerie light. There, hovering in the center of the room, was the Nexus fragment. It glowed with a sickly, pulsing radiance, tendrils of energy snaking out to ensnare the minds of the Kalthar warriors guarding it. Singh didn't hesitate. She leapt forward, her hand outstretched. Her fingers closed around the fragment and the world exploded in a burst of blinding light. Power surged through her, raw and uncontrollable. She screamed as the energy of the Nexus filled her, burning through her veins like liquid fire. She could see everything, feel everything, the thoughts of her enemies, the ebb and flow of the battle raging outside. With a cry of defiance, she unleashed the full might of the Nexus against the Kalthar fleet. Bolts of psionic lightning arced from her fingertips, leaping from ship to ship. Kalthar dreadnoughts exploded, consumed by the fires of their own twisted energy. On the bridge of his flagship, Vaktur howled in rage as he felt the tide of battle turning against him. He redoubled his assault on Brian's mind, pouring all of his hatred and malice into the psychic link between them. Brian staggered under the onslaught, his vision blurring, his knees buckling, but he refused to fall. With a roar of defiance, he surged forward, his psionic will clashing against Vaktur's in a final titanic struggle. They grappled in the void, their minds locked in a deadly embrace. Psionic energy crackled around them, warping the very fabric of space and time. Brian could feel Vaktur's will, a twisted, malevolent thing that sought to consume him utterly. But Brian fought back, drawing on every reserve of strength and willpower. He reached out with his mind, seizing the Nexus fragment that pulsed at the heart of Vaktur's being. With a final, desperate effort, he tore it free, the psychic backlash sending shockwaves through the Kalthar fleet. Vaktur screamed, a sound of pure, unbridled agony. His body convulsed, racked by the energies of the Nexus. Brian watched in horrified fascination as the Kalthar champion was consumed by the very power he had sought to wield, his form dissolving into a swirling maelstrom of psionic energy. On the bridge of the Titan, Brian collapsed, his strength spent. Singh was at his side in an instant, her face a mask of concern. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked out at the stars, at the infinite expanse of the galaxy stretching before them. Somewhere out there, he knew, new threats were waiting, new challenges to be faced. But for now there was only the quiet hum of the Titan's engines, and the knowledge that for a brief moment they had bought their species a future. The Kalthar fleet crumbled under the onslaught of the UES Titan and its allies, their psionic powers flickering and fading as the Nexus fragment was ripped from their grasp. Kalthar ships spun out of control, colliding with each other in a cascade of destruction. On the bridge of the Titan, cheers erupted as the last enemy vessel winked out of existence. Brian slumped in his command chair, his body aching with exhaustion and the toll of his psionic duel with Vaktur. But even as his crew celebrated around him, his eyes sought out Singh. He was at her side in an instant, cradling her head in his lap. "Singh, Singh, stay with me." Her skin was hot to the touch, the Nexus energy pulsing beneath it like a second heartbeat. Brian could feel it surging through her, threatening to tear her apart from within. He didn't hesitate. Reaching out with his own psionic abilities, he began to siphon the excess energy from her body, drawing it into himself. It was like trying to swallow a supernova, the raw power of the Nexus threatening to consume him utterly. But he held on, gritting his teeth against the pain. Slowly, inch by inch, he pulled the energy from Singh's body until she lay still and quiet in his arms. As the last of the energy flowed into him, Brian's mind exploded with visions. He saw the ancient race that had created the Nexus and the conduits, their vast empire spanning the stars. He witnessed their triumphs and their failures, and the cataclysmic war that had brought about their downfall. And he saw the true nature of the Kalthar, not conquerors but parasites, feeding on the psionic energy of other races like vampires. They had been drawn to the Nexus like moths to a flame, seeking to gorge themselves on its power. But even the Kalthar, Brian realized, were mere pawns in a larger game. At the edge of the galaxy, a vast, malevolent presence stirred, the Void, a being of pure darkness and hunger. It was the Void that had driven the Kalthar to invade, the Void that sought to consume all life in the galaxy. "The Nexus," he said, his voice raw, "it was killing you. I had to take it from you." She sat up, her face pale but determined. "What did you see?" He told her everything. The ancient race, the Kalthar, the void. As he spoke, he could see the realization dawning in her eyes. "We haven't won at all, have we?" she said softly. "This was just the beginning." They stood together, looking out at the stars. Out there, Brian knew, were other races, other civilizations that had been touched by the void's darkness. They would need to find them, to unite them, if they were to have any chance of survival. It would be a long and difficult road, fraught with danger and uncertainty. But as he felt the power of the Nexus thrumming within him, Brian knew that they had no choice. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and the UES Titan would be at the forefront, leading the charge against the darkness. Brian and Singh stood on the bridge of the Titan, the weight of their newfound knowledge heavy on their shoulders. The crew bustled around them, tending to the wounded and repairing the damage from the battle, but the two leaders stood apart, their minds racing with the implications of what they had learned. "We can't do this alone," Singh said at last, breaking the silence. "If the void is as powerful as your visions suggest, we'll need help, a lot of help." Brian nodded. "You're right, but who can we turn to? The Vorta, the Kalthar, they've been our enemies for so long." "They were being manipulated just like us," Singh pointed out. "The void was pulling their strings, feeding on their conflict. If we can make them see that, maybe we can find common ground." It seemed an impossible task, to unite races that had been at war for generations. But as Brian looked out at the stars, he knew they had to try. "The conduits," he said suddenly. "We can use them to reach out, to send a message to the other races, show them what we've learned about the void and the threat it poses to us all." Singh's eyes widened. It could work. But we'll need the Nexus to power the conduits and the knowledge of how to use them. Brian tapped his temple. "It's all here in my head. The memories of the ancient race. I can guide us." They set to work, poring over the Titan's star charts and the ancient knowledge gleaned from the Nexus. They identified key systems, strategic points, where they could broadcast their message to the greatest number of races. As they worked, they sent out scouts, small fast ships to gather intelligence and spread the word. Slowly, tentatively, responses began to trickle in. Fair Vorta warlord, weary of the unending conflict, agreed to a meeting under a flag of truce. A Kalthar hive queen, her people decimated by the void's hunger, offered an alliance. Other races, some known, some utterly alien, sent their own emissaries. It was a fragile thing, this nascent alliance. Old wounds and ancient grudges threatened to tear it apart at every turn, but Brian and Singh held it together through sheer force of will, mediating disputes and finding common ground where none seemed to exist. And all the while they worked to master the power of the Nexus and the secrets of the conduits. Under Brian's guidance, Titan's engineers labored to modify the ship, to turn it into a mobile gateway capable of opening the conduits at will. It was a race against time, for even as their alliance grew, so too did the signs of the void's approach. Entire star systems winked out, swallowed by the advancing darkness. Refugee fleets, fleeing the void's hunger, began to arrive at the Titan's doorstep, begging for shelter and protection. Brian and Singh welcomed them all, human and alien alike. The Titan became a beacon of hope, a last bastion against the encroaching night. And as the final modifications to the ship were completed, as the last of the refugee ships took its place in the swelling armada, Brian knew that the time had come. He stood on the bridge, Singh at his side, and looked out at the assembled fleet. Ships of every size and configuration, crewed by beings of every imaginable shape and hue, all united in a single purpose. "Today," he said, his voice carried to every corner of the fleet by the Nexus's power, "we stand together. Today we fight not for our individual races, but for the future of all life in the galaxy. Today we take the fight to the void." Brian turned to Singh, a fierce grin on his face. "Let's light up the conduits. It's time to end this." The Titan surged forward, the Nexus at its heart pulsing with power. Around it the fleet fell into formation, ready to follow it into the heart of the darkness. The war for the galaxy had begun. The Allied fleet surged forward, a phalanx of ships from a dozen races united in purpose. At the vanguard, the UES Titan cut through the void, its weapons blazing, shields flaring as they absorbed the onslaught of the void's forces. On the bridge, Brian and Singh stood side by side, their faces bathed in the eerie glow of the tactical displays. The void's stronghold loomed before them, a twisted mass of dark energy and eldritch technology. "All ships engage at will," Brian ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "Concentrate fire on the central structure." The fleet opened up, a barrage of missiles and energy beams slamming into the void's defenses. Alien ships burst like fireworks, their crews consumed by the ravenous darkness. But the Titan pushed on, its advanced shields shrugging off the worst of the assault. Its guns roared, tearing through the void's minions with relentless precision. At the heart of the stronghold, a shape began to coalesce. A monstrous entity of pure shadow, its form shifting and writhing like a living nightmare. The void itself, manifest at last. "That's our target," Singh said, her hand tight on Brian's arm. "Are you ready?" Brian nodded, reaching out with his mind to the Nexus. He felt its power surge through him, a raging torrent of psychic energy. Together he and Singh focused their wills, shaping the Nexus's raw power into a lance of pure, searing light. They hurled it at the void, a weapon forged from the very essence of life and creation. The void reeled under the impact, its form shuddering and twisting. But it was far from defeated. With a roar that shook the very fabric of space, it lashed out, engulfing the Titan in a maelstrom of dark energy. The ship bucked and heaved, its hull groaning under the strain. Consoles exploded, showering the bridge with sparks and shrapnel. Brian gritted his teeth, pouring every ounce of his strength into the Nexus. He could feel the void's hunger, its insatiable desire to consume and destroy. It battered at his mind, seeking to crush his will, to extinguish the light of his soul. But he held on, drawing strength from the bonds he had forged, with Singh, with his crew, with the countless allies who fought at their side. He thought of Earth, of the billions of lives counting on him on this moment. With a final defiant roar, he unleashed the full might of the Nexus. A blinding flash lit up the void, a supernova of psychic energy that tore at the very foundations of the void's power. Alarms blared, warning lights flashing red. The ship's reactor was going critical, its containment fields failing under the void's onslaught. Brian knew what he had to do. There was no choice, no other way. He turned to Singh, his eyes meeting hers in a moment of perfect understanding. "Evacuate the ship," he ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos raging around them. "Get our people to safety." Singh shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "Brian, no, we can find another way together." He pulled her close, his forehead touching hers. "There is no other way, you know that." He could see the conflict in her eyes, the desperate desire to stay at his side, warring with the duty that had defined her life. In the end, duty won out, as he had known it would. Singh nodded, a single tear tracing down her cheek. She turned to the crew, her voice ringing out over the din of battle. "All hands abandon ship. Make for the escape pods." The bridge erupted into a flurry of activity as the crew scrambled to obey. Singh lingered for a moment, her hand tight in Brian's. "I love you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know," he replied, a sad smile on his lips. "Now go, they need you." With a final, anguished look, Singh turned and ran, leading the crew to the escape pods. Brian watched her go, a sense of calm settling over him. But he held on, his mind locked with the Nexus, his will an unbreakable shield against the darkness. He poured everything he had into the ship's engines, setting a collision course for the heart of the void. As the Titan hurtled forward, Brian closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind. He could feel the presence of the Allied fleet, of the countless lives fighting and dying in the battle raging around him. And beyond them, he could sense the pulse of the galaxy itself, the endless cycle of life and death, of creation and destruction. In that moment, he understood. The void was not an aberration, not a cancer to be excised. It was a part of the cycle, as necessary as the light that opposed it. Without darkness, there could be no light. Without death, no life. The Titan struck the heart of the void, the ship's reactor detonating in a blinding flash of light. The explosion tore through the stronghold, a supernova of energy that shattered the void's power, scattering its essence to the cosmic winds. In the heart of that maelstrom, Brian felt himself dissolving, his consciousness expanding to encompass the infinite. He was the light and the darkness, the beginning and the end. He was eternal. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.